Welcome to Front and Center, from political battlefields to cooperative playing fields. Hello, I'm Michael Maxene. Today, my partner Steve Berriman and I are resuming Front and Center with our initial guest, Charles Eisenstein. His work, Steve's work, and my work have now converged with a sense of urgency around getting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on the ballot in all states and elected president. This is what has brought us back together since that podcast of September 2021, when Charles was our very first guest when we launched Front and Center. We are each focused on what we can do, which will allow us to move forward to that more beautiful and just world our hearts know is possible. For those of you who are not familiar with Charles, let me give a very brief and modest introduction. And by the way, don't meet the author, I think was a bumper sticker Charles referred to in our podcast before. And I would say you want to meet the author, but I'm not going to embarrass Charles. But I was first introduced to Charles by my co-founder of Rebellious Truths back in early 2011, when he handed me a copy and asked me to read the book Here, Sacred Economics. That was my first introduction to Charles's work. And then we set up an interview with Charles in early 2012 in San Francisco. And then I've followed his work since then. I had the opportunity to talk with him on various occasions. And another one of his important books, Climate, A New Story, which is at the forefront right now of the move to healing America. And one of the major parts of that is all described in his work, Climate, A New Story, which we'll get into later. Steve, what would you like to add to help us welcome Charles and get started?
Thank you, Michael, and welcome, Charles. You know, we've got two very powerful ideas that Michael and I have been working on related to the concept of front and center. Because if we think about it, looking at the two-potty system that we've had, the American people have been rather passive. They've accepted the narratives until now that they've been handed, and from one side or the other, and people have been discouraged from finding out for themselves. And this campaign is such a wonderful opportunity for people to leave the safe shelters of these narratives that have been developed and to really find a new way. So we're calling it a call to come front and center. Front is leadership, and the center, like you're talking about, this kind of sane and sacred center, is the place where this leadership has to come from. So this is really quite a call. There's something that's been missing, and I think you're going to speak to this today, Charles, from our political discourse, and that's that sane and sacred center. That's the spiritual center that maybe we had at one point, maybe we've never had, but certainly one that we need to get to, something that's bigger than religion and non-religion. And I like to imagine that, you know, when this country was founded 250 years ago, that there was a kind of sensibility that was required of our citizens. And perhaps finally we're ready to mature based on the necessity of, you know, what we're facing right now. We're ready to mature and become the people who are worthy of that legacy. And perhaps there's a new movement, and you know, we're thinking, as you are, that Bobby is what's focalizing this new movement, the person that's in front of that. So, Charles, why don't you talk a little bit about your concept of healing America and how this campaign is a focal point for that?
Yeah, well, thank you, Max and Steve. I think I heard Steve say the two-potty system. If it were anyone else, I would have thought that was a slip of tongue. But in your case, I'm sure that was intentional. And it's true, you know, like we kind of alternate presidents and Congresses too, to some extent, from Democrat to Republican and back again. And no matter who we choose, the country continues to swirl down the toilet. So when we speak of, so that's one of the impulses that got me involved in politics, despite anything I ever expected. But when we speak of the center, it's not some lukewarm place in between the polarized positions of our political discourse. It's actually outside of them or above them. I call it the Transcendent Center, or below them in a way, because it draws on the common moral agreements and basic human impulses that actually could unite our country. Most of the inflammatory issues that we fight about are in some sense artificial. The division is artificial, because when you get right down to it, like take environment, highly polarized issue right now because of climate change. Some people believe in it, some don't. There's a lot of controversy there, but fundamentally, most human beings want to live in a world of life and beauty. People love nature. They want to see nature thrive. They want to hear songbirds in the morning. They want to look up and see beautiful skies. They want to breathe clean air. They want to eat healthy food. They don't want to have poisons in their bodies. Like, that is a pretty broad agreement. Somehow that agreement has been contorted into division. Same thing about, like, I would even go to what maybe the most divisive issue, abortion. How many people actually relish the idea of abortions? Very few. How many people relish the idea of coercing women to go through with a pregnancy that they don't want? Very few. So again, we have a fundamental common moral ground that has been manipulated into division. I could go down the line, so many issues like that. So when I speak of the Transcendent Center, it is to dig underneath to find the agreements that we hold in common, and also the questions that no one is asking. Because when we ask questions that are off the radar, and we look at issues that don't count as political issues, they're not among the check boxes that you will see on a poll. Those are the places that we can find agreement, and where we can actually solve some of the problems where we can present and enact solutions that will stop us from swirling down the toilet bowl.
I'd like to jump in here. Charles, you said something that I think was important about asking the questions. And that's one of the things that you, by the way, I forgot that part of my introduction, is you are officially the director of messaging with Robert Kennedy. And that's fantastic. But one of the most important things is asking the right questions, and then being willing to listen broadly to get a holistic perspective. And you've elaborated really well about asking the right questions, and that has not been done. Can you give us some examples of that?
Yeah, sure. So I am, my official title is Director of Messaging. I'm also the main speechwriter on the rare occasions where Bobby needs a speech written, because usually he speaks extemporaneously. But if it's a formal speech with a teleprompter, that kind of thing, then I collaborate with him to write speeches. And yeah, I'm just kind of in the leadership team. And so I've found fertile ground for some of my thinking that I've developed as a philosopher over the last 10 or 20 years. And so to answer your question, one example would be, this is a really basic one, but immigration. Most of the controversy is about, should we build a wall or not? Should we secure the border, or should we be compassionate and let them in? This is, again, a false division on one level, simply because it's not actually the kind of policy that has been running for the last few years is not actually compassionate. It's caused a tremendous humanitarian crisis that ultimately not only does it cause a lot of harm to the recipient country, at least in the short run, straining all kinds of resources. But in the bigger picture, does it actually help the source country to export their young people, their most dynamic, motivated, capable people to another country? Is this actually a compassionate policy? So the question that needs to be asked, that is rarely asked, is why are so many people so desperate to leave home, to leave their culture and come to another country? And sometimes leave their kids behind with the grandparents and send money back, or take terrible risks, putting themselves and their families in the hands of criminal cartels. What does it take? What would it take for you to do that? Like, that's the kind of question that actually, and this is the keystone that compassion asks. What is it like to be you? Let me understand. And when you ask that question, you come up with some pretty uncomfortable answers, because in large part, it's the policies of our very country that have caused the immigration crisis through support for dictators and juntas and coups in Latin America, the support of repressive regimes, the imposition of neoliberal austerity policies that that vacuum up the wealth, the natural resources from other countries, that suppress labor movements, that suppress land redistribution, that cut social welfare programs, that cut pensions. Like, all of these policies make life unlivable in other places, and then of course people want to come here. So it's hypocritical to make life unlivable there but not let them leave. And so, as long as we don't ask that question, we're always going to have an immigration crisis, and we're always going to be faced with an impossible choice of do we let them in or do we keep them out? And that has terrible consequences either way. So that's one example, and I'll give another example that's very much at the heart of the campaign, which is chronic disease. How many political polls will have, when they ask you what issue do you care about the most, have you ever seen chronic disease on that list? No, it's abortion, it's immigration, it's guns, it's the economy, something like that. How often do you see chronic disease on there? Yet this is the impact that chronic disease has on Americans. Chronic diseases have risen from under 10% in the 1960s. The prevalence has risen, to something like 50 or 60% today. I could give you more exact figures, but I would do that by making them up. And then I get fact checked, which is really embarrassing. So, but actually, I'm kind of joking here, because in fact, it depends on how you measure things, and so you can always fact check somebody. But I think that our lived experience confirms that something is wrong here. People are sick. So how often do you see that asked as a political issue? So that's something that we're looking at, and in the administration, we're going to focus our a lot of resources on that, on answering the question, what is causing this epidemic of chronic disease? And we'll go into it without ready-made answers. It could be pharmaceutical products, it could be pesticide residues, it could be electromagnetic radiation, it could be forever chemicals, PFAs, that have entered into our bodies and the environment. It could be any number of things. It could be simply less and less time on outdoors and more time on screen, watching podcasts and things like that. We don't know, but these are the questions that aren't even being asked. And it should be the number one question being asked, at least as far as health policy goes. So those are two examples.
Well, you mentioned something of the mainstream media, or the two parties that are constantly battling over, like guns. And Bobby asked the great question, why aren't we trying to do research to find out why a country with as many guns as we've always had, all of a sudden we stand out from the pack with all of these mass shootings that never occurred before when guns were even equally as prevalent in our society. And so the constant desire to ask questions to get to root causes. And that's one of the things I love about you and Robert Kennedy is ask those questions and let's get to the root causes that we can move ahead with.
Yeah.
I know Steve's got some questions. One of the things that our generation, and we're representative of the baby boomers, we're a generation ahead of you. My daughter is basically the same age as you, Charles. We lived that trauma of Jack Kennedy's assassination, Martin Luther King's, Robert Kennedy's, and you recently just republished an essay that you had come out with in, I believe it was October of 2021, titled The America That Was and Yet May Be. I think that's something that for the baby boomers, which is the biggest audience that we've had difficulty breaking through because of their reliance on mainstream media sources, that trauma that's been experienced. You wrote this great essay that I reread. Can you address that? You just talked about it last week and how that's impacted where America has gone, where we are today.
Yeah. The title of that was The America That Almost Was and Yet May Be.
Yeah.
And it refers to this kind of golden age where we were the unchallenged exemplary nation in the world, the champion of freedom and democracy, or at least we were seen that way and we saw ourselves that way. And yeah, we had problems, we had injustices, we had Jim Crow was still prevalent, we had environmental problems, gay people, women were second-class citizens, but we were working on those. The civil rights movement was underway, the environmental movement was underway, and we were going to solve all of these problems. We were going to truly become the nation that was promised in our founding. And we were turning toward peace. We had a president, John F. Kennedy, who made a powerful, compelling speech at Washington University about peace. He had defused the potentially civilization-ending Cuban Missile Crisis. He had, on numerous occasions, stepped back and resisted the advice of his generals to go to war. He was pulling troops out of Vietnam. The advisors, he was going to pull them out of Vietnam. And I don't want to overstate the case, but he was really reviving an anti-imperialist thread of like a recessive gene in the American political psyche that traces back. You can trace it back at least certainly to the Roosevelt administration, where there were really radical figures like Harry Hopkins and not George Wallace, Henry Wallace, who really wanted to pursue a much less confrontational attitude toward the Soviet Union, and to support liberation movements around the world. And so Kennedy was kind of sympathetic to all that stuff. And so we had the possibility of America really walking a path of freedom, of healing, of democracy, of liberation. And he faced stiff resistance from the military-industrial complex, from the foreign policy establishment, from industry and the CIA. And I believe, in fact, I think it's quite obvious when you really dig into it, that he was assassinated by rogue elements, or maybe not even rogue elements of the CIA. And just when you look into the whole story, it just beggars belief that the official narrative could possibly be true. That was promulgated by the Dulles Commission. Allen Dulles was someone that Kennedy had fired, and a bitter enemy. So anyway, so that event on November 22nd, 1963, it reverberates even today through the American consciousness. Everybody who is alive then remembers where they were on that day, because it was an event of mythic proportions. It was a mythic event, not just a political event. And it really shifted the course of American history. And then with the further assassination of Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy, that cemented this new timeline toward endless war, toward the neglect of our founding principles, toward the gradual hollowing out of everything that made America potentially great in every sense of the word. The war on poverty was eviscerated because we were devoting so much of our finances toward Vietnam. And so, but the biggest damage that the assassination did was, see, on some level, nobody or most people did not actually believe the official story. But they couldn't accept the alternative. That was too much cognitive dissonance to think that our own heroic intelligence agencies, our own heroic establishment. I mean, we were, less than 2 decades past the triumph over Nazism and Imperial Japan. And we were locked in a struggle against the evil power of the Soviet Union. Like it was inconceivable that there would be a coup in our own country. People could not accept that. So they willingly chose to believe a lie that on some deep level they did not believe. And I don't know if you've ever been in this kind of romantic relationship or anything else, but or even a work relationship. If you pretend to believe a lie and you act upon that, then everything begins to disintegrate. You will accept one lie after another, and that is what has happened in our country, to the point where now the government routinely lies to us, and we kind of take it for granted. And we have an entire corrupt system built on lies and secrecy, and it's totally normalized. And we don't blink an eye when we find out. I mean, generally, some people blink an eye, but when we find out about the routine surveillance of the public, the violation of much of the Bill of Rights, or at least its attenuation, and just the routine dissembling of politicians that has cast us into a world of hype and spin and optics and messaging. What about actually plain spoken truth? Can we expect that ever again, that our government, that our leaders will be honest with us? It's hard to imagine, but we used to expect it. When Gary Powers was shot down over the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union accused us of sending spy planes over their country, Eisenhower went on national television and he said, "We do not do that." I can't remember his exact words, but and then it turned out that then they produced Gary Powers, and revealed that as a lie, and people were shocked that the president would ever lie to them. We're not shocked anymore. And so this is really, on some level, this is what the candidacy of RFK Jr. represents. It's a possibility of restoring that lost timeline, because he is the strongest major candidate, peace candidate, certainly in my lifetime. Certainly since, I don't know, George McGovern. I guess that's still in my lifetime, barely. But yeah.
He represented the establishment. No, we haven't had anyone in my lifetime since Kennedy until RFK now comes along. But I could go on with this conversation and just focus on asking you questions, Charles. But I know Steve's got some good questions that he wants to ask. So please, Steve.
In contrast to what you're talking about, how we are so immune to lies, we actually don't know what to do with truth. So in watching the really amazing program on Earth Day program with you and Vandana Shiva and Bobby and so on, what was really extraordinary is that in actually speaking about what is it that might be causing all of this illness, and wouldn't it be, instead of all of this political posturing around climate change, what if we just rebuilt the soil? What if we actually started from the grassroots, literally? And then I started thinking, wow, look at who does not want that to be seen? I mean, it's, when people, point at Bobby and they accuse him of, the anti-vaxxer thing and all of that, the real reason why they don't want him to speak is because of what he is speaking about this holistic view of exactly why is it that people are sick? What is the relationship between our unhealthy, uncaring healthcare system and the food that we eat and all of the industries that are dependent? I mean, I just saw 3 or 4 industries busted on that podcast yesterday on Earth Day. And so how people are so unused to hearing these kinds of meta truths that really look at the bigger picture. How do you see that unfolding? Do you find that people are resisting these kinds of meta truths, or do you find them embracing? What kind of response have you had? Because I know you've been talking about that, and so is he, to that message about looking at our political and spiritual and physical health as all one thing.
Yeah, I think that this is an emerging consciousness of our time. That we talked about that a bit on the panel. That the interconnectedness of all things, the inseparability of the health of the environment, the health of ecosystems, the health of rainforests, the health of rivers, the health of the ocean, the health of the soil from our own health. That one cannot happen in the long run at the expense of the other. And therefore, this division between environmentalism and economy, or environment and human well-being, is a false division. And in fact, the more that we protect and restore Earth and serve life beyond human life, the more we thrive as well. So this is a very different consciousness based on, I even call it a different civilizational mythology than the one that has prevailed for many centuries now, which is the mythology of ascent, the mythology of domination, the mythology that says that human well-being comes through the domination of all of the rest of nature, and envisions our apogee, the zenith of human development to be a high-tech world where everybody is indoors all the time and served by machines, and maybe out in space, leaving nature behind, and dominating all body processes with chemicals and nanobots and all that kind of stuff. Like it's a mythology of separation, and that is becoming rapidly obsolete as we face the horrific consequences of that ambition, of that attempt. And so that's like a bigger, that's the context. And that now we have a candidate who, I mean, he doesn't usually speak in those terms, but it's in his sphere. I mean, I'm talking about it. It's in the background, and a lot of what he stands for, whether consciously or not, is sourcing from this emerging understanding of our interconnectedness. And that's why health policy cannot be about how do we come up with the next pill or the next gadget or the next shot that will help us dominate nature even more and make us more immune to and more separate from the world outside of ourselves. But rather, how do we support the natural healing process, the natural tendency of life towards wholeness? How do we create conditions in which life can thrive? And so we start looking at the environment. We start looking, at the natural environment, at the medical environment, at the social environment too. Because I mean, personally, I think a lot of the chronic disease of our time comes from despair, comes from loss of meaning. It comes from the unmet desire to participate in a collective project that is meaningful and beautiful to you. Like, where is our, why, like a lot of people aren't even having kids anymore. And they say, well, I'm afraid that the future will be unlivable. I'm afraid of climate change. There's too many people and we're hurting the earth. But I think a lot of it is that having children is the most fundamental way to participate in the future, to give to the future. And if you don't have a future that inspires you, if there's no grand project of humanity that inspires you, then you're going to feel kind of a listlessness. You're going to feel an apathy, because we human beings are not just here to survive and reproduce. We are here to participate in something sacred, in something meaningful, in something precious that we believe in. That's what our creativity is for. And if we don't have that, if we don't have a collective narrative that can help us answer the question, what is a human being for? Then we start to wither on the vine and disengage and not care and become cynical and nihilistic. And really what is needed from our leadership now is a vision of where we can go that actually inspires people, a vision of the future that people want to live for. We need something to live for. We need something to sacrifice to. We need something to commit to and to dedicate ourselves to.
Purpose is at the core. Having purpose is at the core of making everything meaningful. One of the things that you touched on there about the natural environment and all these chronic diseases, I mean, I think it was a study recently that showed that the carrots that I ate as a kid 70 years ago, 60 years ago, today it takes 8 or more carrots to equal the same nutrient value that we used to get. And nature, God, life created our bodies to heal, but we have to give them the nutrients and the rest and the things that they need, the clean air, water, and the food to do that. And instead of everything being a pill that just enriches some pharmaceutical company and a doctor and all that, instead of focusing on the root causes of all of this illness, and the solution to it is a healthy environment with good quality food, nutrient-rich food, etc. And
you can taste it. I mean, the carrots, like those, I don't know, bunny love carrots. Am I about to commit a crime here by slandering this company? But they don't have much taste. You know what I mean? Like, they hardly taste like a carrot. And that a lot of that, some of it is that they're overbred, but I mean, we haven't even talked about like ultra processed food, but yeah, like, it's because of the depletion of the soil. It's because I think one thing is when you, or if you're a carrot doesn't face challenges, it doesn't grow strong. It doesn't create the bioflavonoids, and all the chemicals that give it flavor and give it energy. So yeah. Again, this is one of the questions that you rarely see in political debate. Like agriculture itself, it's usually just about farm subsidies or something like that. But that is, again, one of the signature policies of the campaign, just to completely reform America's agricultural system. Yeah.
You talked about the highly processed foods. I understand that there's over 1,000 chemicals banned in Europe in food processing and farming that are allowed here in our country. And when anybody travels abroad, you quickly see there's hardly anybody living in those countries when you go to Europe or Asia that's obese. You come here and you're surrounded by people, and yet I used to be hard on it, but now I understand that they really don't have a lot of choices. It's
Oh yeah, it's not people's fault.
no,
Like that, blaming the victim is a sure way to perpetuate the status quo. It is the environment, it's the patterns of life that have taken hold here, and a lot of it is the food, and also the despair. I mean, a lot of it is from a kind of an addiction. That's another of the real epidemics of our time is addiction. And yeah, but other countries are catching up,
oh yeah,
unfortunately. The contagion that of which the United States is the epicenter is spreading, but that also means that the healing can start here too. The greatest healing starts where we're in the presence of the greatest illness. Yeah, but this should be, and to return it to politics, these 1,000 chemicals we're talking about, and this should be what the FDA is protecting us from. But because they've become the FDA and the USDA and CDC have become so captured by industry, they're not asking those questions. They're not really being vigilant. They accept studies that are funded by industry and that neglect to ask the real questions. And who knows, which studies get put before the CDC and or the FDA and which ones, languish in the file drawer. And do they even study the combinations of chemicals, or do they take them one at a time? I mean, there's so many questions that are not asked. And so the FDA isn't vigilant about this kind of thing, but they are vigilant about, like I read about how they went after a pomegranate juice company not because that they were making claims on their website about the health benefits of pomegranate juice, but because they merely linked to another website that made those claims. And the FDA went after them. Now, can't you see that there is a problem here in the priorities and the basic mindset of this agency? That's the kind of thing that again, it's not on the political radar, but we're trying to put it on the political radar because we could solve so many of our nation's problems without even touching these divisive wedge issues. Is that liberal or conservative to focus on chronic illness? Is that liberal or conservative to get corporate influence out of regulatory agencies? Is that left or right? Is that red or blue? Or is that a unifying common sense issue that both major parties have neglected?
Along those lines, I wanted to bring something up, something that's changed tremendously, certainly in the last 4 years. But when we met at a conference in 2009. Vandana Shiva was at that conference, and it was a fairly progressive organization that ran it. And the three of us might be personas non grata if that conference were to happen right now, because since COVID, there's been a split in the quote unquote progressive evolutionary community, the community that we've felt an affinity for many decades. And because of the division around COVID, which I think it certainly created an awakening for me to look, further above and beyond the progressive narratives and so on. And so there is that division, and you were at the focal point of that, maybe unintentionally when you poked your head out a few years ago and spoke your truth and found yourself deplatformed. That seems to be a contention in this election, as the people that I know, many of the people in my community are going, how could you support this candidate who's going to help put Donald Trump in office and that sort of thing? So we're looking at, so that's our community. That's the community that you and I have been involved with, since I met you. How do we, there's a wedge there. How do we speak into what seems to be a non-listening, and where do we find the listening and the non-listening?
Yeah. One consequence of the general breakdown of sense and meaning and identity in our culture is that people look for that identity and sense and meaning through allegiance to an opinion tribe, to a political tribe. And what becomes the most important is not really the issues on which that tribe developed, but it's, are you with us or against us? And opinions become mere signifiers of your allegiance. So, so to some extent, these opinions, what the correct opinion is, to some extent, is kind of random, but it's also manipulated by powerful interests in order to get what they want. So, for example, various kinds of COVID orthodoxy that waved the banner of enlightened science and compassion, and contradistinguished themselves from the benighted MAGA hat wearing ignoramuses. That they were not actually, they didn't actually embody traditional left values. Left is supposed to question authority. Left is supposed to resist corporate control of public discourse and public institutions. Left is supposed to embrace nature, and natural solutions that are not that so amenable to profit. So left and right got all mixed up here. And I think that in speaking to people, it really does help to highlight that fact that, I thought left was supposed to be anti-war and pro-peace. I thought left was supposed to defend civil liberties from authoritarianism. I thought authoritarianism was right, and civil liberties was left. That it was the conservatives. When I was a kid, it was the conservatives who wanted to restrict free speech. And I thought it was that the left would question the intelligence agencies and question the rationale for war. So all of that, like a lot of these issues have been ceded to the so-called right, but are they actually right anymore? Or do these terms even make sense? And I think that they less and less make sense. But because this tribalism, this partisan mentality is so strong, if you violate any of these precepts, any of these signifying opinions, then you mark yourself as an enemy. So you must be helping Trump if you disagree with some of our signature opinions. In fact, when you look at polls, it is questionable whether our candidacy helps Trump. In fact, if anything, it hurts Trump. It's close, but we're drawing support from both ends. And my gut feeling is that we hurt Trump a little bit more because we split the anti-establishment vote. But we also have really strong appeal among Black people, Hispanics, Latinos, and in general, people who feel dispossessed and left out of the system. So in that regard, some of those are traditional Democratic bases. So we do draw from both, but really the goal of the campaign is to draw from those who have been, from the disaffected, from the homeless Democrats and the homeless Republicans and the independents who have long abandoned hope in political parties and the whole political system. So we have, like, a lot of our donors are people who have never donated to a candidate in their entire lives. They've been apolitical because they have lost hope that either of the two potties is capable of extricating us from the shithole, but now hope has been renewed. And so we want to draw on this vast swath of people who don't vote, who are not considered by pollsters to be likely voters. And I think that as we draw these people in, which is actually good for democracy, whether or not you support Robert F. Kennedy Jr., it's good for democracy to re-engage people in the political process. But as we draw these people in, we're going to really upend the conventional political calculus.
This question we get thrown at all the time. I know Steve does, and I do. I'm out there canvassing on campuses and making hundreds of phone calls to supporters. You're helping Trump, you're helping Biden, depending on what camp they're at. And it's like, wait a minute, folks, aren't we tired of electing people? We know what we would get if Biden continues. We know what we would get if Trump gets reelected. And do we want to continue this, or do we want to finally focus on the solutions? Can we finally turn that corner? You spoke to turning the corner, which I think is important for people, because people are so feeling like my vote doesn't count, and the individual vote doesn't count, but the collective impact of those votes makes a huge difference if we would vote for what we want. But even if we could elect Robert Kennedy, the next day, the world's not going to change. Well, it is, but people aren't going to feel it. You talked really nicely about turning the corner and what we would see over a course of time, so that people's expectations aren't like, okay, I'm going to go vote, and tomorrow that the sun is going to shine forever again immediately.
Right. Yeah, our political institutions, our government institutions have tremendous inertia. And simply installing a new captain at the helm does not change the course of the ship of state overnight. It's a matter of appointing appointing a new crop of people to leadership positions in all the departments and agencies, and then they appoint new people underneath them. But there's a lot of career bureaucrats, and they have their way of doing things, and there's a whole organizational culture and a whole body of regulations that cannot be changed overnight either. Things are not going to change that quickly, and in fact, over time can only change if there is a sustained popular movement, sustained pressure from underneath. That it's not, democracy is not just a one-time act of an election. It's actually, elections are just one vehicle for citizen participation. And if we really want a democracy in this country, we have to act like it. We have to actually engage and participate in many ways, on many levels, from local governments to the states, to the national government, and civil society organizations. Like we've become so disengaged as a people that it's like we're kind of waiting for democracy to be restored from on high, waiting for it to be granted back to us. And that mindset in itself, that's an authoritarian mindset. We've become really conditioned to authoritarianism. And so a lot of what this political campaign is about, it's more than just about winning an election. It's also about reinvigorating the democratic instincts of the people of this country, and to say, you can make a difference. We don't have to accept the choices that are being offered to us. We don't have to accept the menu that we are given. We can write a new item on the menu. We can discard the menu and put a new set of choices on. This is about the questions that are not being asked. We don't have to accept the way that politics has been. If we believe actually in democracy, that the source even of our Constitution is the people, we've got to step back into that understanding in order for things to really change.
I really think of this as a recovery program, as in 12-step, because what you outlined earlier about the trauma of the Kennedy assassination and having to live a lie, and what the consequences are of living a lie, of buying lies, of expecting lies and accepting lies. And you also mentioned the power of a movement, both behind and in front of Bobby Kennedy. Famous Breitbart quote is, "Politics is always downstream of culture." So in a certain regard, what you're healing, the idea of healing America, is actually building a culture around this sane and sacred center. Without that movement, as you said, even if he were elected, there would still need to be this movement. And I keep thinking, I'm older than you guys, both of you guys, and I keep thinking
Only a
1960.
couple years older than me.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking 1965. That was the year that I was the first kid on my block to be against the Vietnam War. And it was not a popular position. One of my friends was Army ROTC, and he was gung-ho. But by 1967, everything had changed. He was on my side. We were both marching on Fifth Avenue. And the difference I would attribute to what we called in those days teach-ins that happened on campus. And I see, one of the great things that I've been helping people to, okay, doesn't matter who you're going to vote for, but we want Bobby on the ballot everywhere. And we want you to watch him. We want you to listen to him, because I think he's a teacher. He's been doing teach-ins. What we experienced yesterday related to Earth Day, in putting together a meta context about the relationship between our health, the planet's health, our spiritual health, our political health, putting it all in one piece. There's nobody who's been presenting meta context. He's presenting meta context, which is what enables people to awaken from this trance of separation, which you also, Charles, identified as one of the key problems that we have. So I'm seeing that this is a time, we don't have 2 years, we have 6 months to create these teach-ins where people are able to see a perspective that has been hidden and repressed. So speak to how this campaign is really going to essentially activate a movement that's going to be persistent over the next bunch of years.
Yeah, I think a lot of the modern, the contemporary equivalent of a teach-in might be podcast. A lot of people have been drawn to the campaign because they heard Bobby on a long form podcast, maybe with Joe Rogan, with one of the other ones, and those experiences cut through the fog of media slander that portray him as a crazed anti-vaxxer or a crazed conspiracy theorist, or using other words to signal that he is an untouchable, that he's radioactive, that a decent person would never consider him. Like if you actually can get past that enough to actually listen, and then you imagine President Biden or President Trump having a 2-hour conversation with that level, that depth of intelligence, that grasp of history, that grasp of nuance. There's just no way that Biden or Trump are remotely in that league. And then a possibility stirs of a leader who's actually thoughtful. So we almost, again, take for granted the scripts are so highly produced of our politicians, and when they're not produced, they're just like these strings of platitudes that pretend to beliefs that they don't actually have, because they're so aware of, what am I signifying here? What am I signaling? What am I how will this be interpreted? That they don't actually say what they really believe. I often get this sense when I watch a politician hyperventilating about, the threat of Russia to roll across Europe once they're done with Ukraine. And I'm like, do you actually believe that? Really? I don't believe that you believe what you are saying. It just is a signal. It's an allegiance signal. In this case, allegiance to the military-industrial complex. So people, as I was saying before, they don't necessarily vote on issues. Some people do, but most people don't line up the candidates and see which one they agree with on the most issues and maybe give a weight to all of those. And okay, this is the one. I mean, for one thing, people don't really believe that the candidates will follow through on their issue positions. And with good reason. It's not just because the candidates are dishonest, it's also because the system cannot accommodate that kind of change if you're not really committed and you don't really believe it. So people don't actually vote that much on issues. They vote on what the stated issue positions signify in terms of, are you one of us or one of them? I might be overstating the case a little bit, but because people don't vote on issues primarily, except as signifiers, the character, the intelligence, the honesty, the integrity, the authenticity of a candidate becomes even more important. How will they handle themselves? And I have to say, like, I am deeply impressed with Bobby Kennedy. I've spent quite a lot of time with him, and I've seen the most telling moments are when he thinks no one's looking, or when it's just not politically relevant, and he is a man of deep compassion, kindness, takes time for children. He was late for one campaign meeting because he had taken a bunch of kids, including some of his grandkids, but some other kids too, including my son, actually, out to the shore, out where they live in Hannahsport in Massachusetts, and he was like, that was more important to him in that moment than the meeting. He kept everybody waiting for the children, and so there's just like little things like that, and even where I disagree with him, and we do have like vehement and substantive disagreements, but at least I have a trust that he's somebody who could change his mind, who could admit that he was wrong, and is willing to undergo that humiliation because he cares about the truth. So, yeah, there are issues that I strongly resonate with him that brought me into the orbit. But I won't pretend to be different than anybody else. I would still vote for him, just on the basis of those issues. But it's his character and intelligence that really motivates me and keeps me in it at a deep level.
Something you said there, Charles, I want to comment on, and that is his ability to evolve his thinking, listening to people and not being, his ego doesn't seem to be tied up in being right and holding on to a position that he might have held years ago or even days ago. That's so important for a leader today, not a politician, but a leader, to demonstrate his willingness to listen and evolve his thinking as he gains more insight into an issue. That's something that I greatly admire in him and respect. You were involved in an interview conversation, not an interview, that I've shared with easily well over 100 people, probably 200 people, the link to it. And it's a podcast that you did back in June of last year with Aubrey Marcus. And one of the things I like about it when I share it to these people that I call on behalf of the campaign and that I meet in the street, the great picture of you and the headline that says, "Can RFK Jr. really change the world?" Big question mark. And then the subtitle, "The future of the world depends on us," with Charles Eisenstein. And that goes back to the point that you were making and that I was trying to get to, where when we turn the corner, a president alone cannot do this. It takes a movement, as Steve referred to. It takes a national party. And what some of the lessons, there were a couple of major lessons that Ross Perot brought forth in his attempt, and that he helped demonstrate and then talk about, that we needed. And beyond just the candidate and a president is a national party. And this is where I'm hoping to help be the ability to connect with the Forward Party. The Forward Party and the type of new kind of party that Andrew Yang is the founder of and leader, but there's many people throughout the country. This is the new kind of party that would resonate with the exact type of movement that is demonstrated by Robert Kennedy, yourself, and all of the people that are working on this. A new kind of party that embraces people from a broad perspective, says, come as you are, but come with integrity. Come with a commitment to serve. Come with a commitment to be willing to listen and seek solutions that will serve truly the vast majority of people. But come as you are. You're not expected to adhere to a particular ideology or resonate on every issue with somebody, or being told from leadership down what to do. And so the combination of electing Robert Kennedy and then helping birth this Forward Party, this new kind of party, will be able to give the support that Kennedy will need after election to elect people throughout the country. But also, as soon as this new kind of party, the Forward Party, comes into fruition in throughout the nation. Right now, it's in, I think, about 12 states official. By the end of this year, it should be in well over 20. By sometime next year, over 40, maybe even 50 states within the next year or so. Soon as within a state that party is there, it gives the politicians that we are going to elect in November, or those already in office, for the first time, they will have the ability to stand up to the leadership of these parties and the money to do what their heart, their intelligence, and their constituents are asking of them, because they won't have that control point of the money necessary and the mechanism and organization to get elected again and get through the primary system. Soon as there is another party that will allow them to come there, by doing the right thing, they can stand up and begin to do the right thing. And if the parties want to say, we'll primary you out, we won't endorse you, they'll say, fine, I can become a Democrat Fordist, a Republican Fordist, a Green Party Fordist, a Libertarian Fordist, whatever. And they'll have a way to get reelected and hold on to those jobs, which for many were the best job they ever had in their life. So this, I believe, is part of that process of having a president like Kennedy and a party like the Forward Party to help move beyond this election to continue this movement.
Yeah, I think, we're not really running in a party. We're an independent candidate.
Oh yeah.
But after we win, there could be a party could develop around us, or I don't know how it's going to work. I haven't thought that much about that.
God doesn't share with us how that's going to play out.
Maybe I'll say something about this question that a lot of people ask, well, but can he win? Which is related to what someone mentioned earlier. Am I throwing my vote away? Is he going to spoil it for Trump? Is he going to spoil it for Biden? One of the habits of authoritarianism is a passivity that disinvolves oneself from a question like, can he win? Will he win? The question, is he going to win, can be taken two ways. One is as a request for a prediction. Second is as a request for a commitment. If you believe that you have agency in making something happen, then you cannot just step back and make a prediction. You can say, yeah, he's going to win because I'm going to make it happen. So when I'm asked, like there's a kind of a like this aloofness to, yeah, but can he win? Well, don't you think you have any agency in this? Maybe the answer to that is yes, if you believe that he can, and no, if you believe that he can't. And this isn't, New Age manifestation speak. This is, are you going to be committed to doing the things that are required to make him win? Because if enough people embrace the agency that a democratic citizen must embrace for this to be a democracy, if enough people do that, then yeah, he can win. And I think that there is a real path to victory. We're not there yet. If the election were held today, we would not win. But some huge, although I think we're actually closer than the polls indicate, because a lot of people who are classified as not likely voters actually are going to vote for the first time. And there's a lot of headroom, a lot of room for growth, in that we see when people actually finally listen to him, and he enters the debate. I mean, imagine what the debate is going to be like. Imagine this man going up against Donald Trump or Joe Biden in a debate. So
if they allow a debate, they both.
If they allow, and if they don't, that's significant too.
That's a huge anti-democracy. They talk about democracy and saving it, both sides of them, and yet they don't want to have the process of democracy.
Yeah, but really the question is, in a way, this candidacy is a litmus test. The question, will he win, is a litmus test for a deeper question is, are we ready, actually, for national healing? It's really about national healing. It's about healing our divisions. It's about healing our environment. It's about healing our bodies, our health. It's about healing the institutions of democracy. It's about healing the economy, our infrastructure. I mean, all of these things are in horrible disrepair. Why? Because we have devoted on a national level, our political energies toward division and toward domination of the rest of the world. I was just doing some research. I'm working up a policy paper. And I was like, if we had, after we won the Cold War, 1991, if we had reduced military spending to what it was before World War II, what would our finances look like? And the answer I came up with, and this is a conservative answer, was somewhere like $13 trillion has gone into, and this isn't even constant dollars, 13 trillion total dollars since 1990 has been spent on keeping defense spending at the level, like we've spent 17 trillion, but if we had been spending at pre-World War II levels in constant dollars, it would have been as a proportion of GDP, actually. So not even constant dollars. As a proportion of GDP, it would have been 4 trillion, give or take. So that's 13 trillion extra dollars that are now all in the budget deficit. And even more, the contribution to the deficit is even more than that because of interest on all of that borrowing. So we've basically bankrupted our country in order to dominate the world, in order to prop up repressive regimes, in order to pursue vain ambitions of a new American century and full spectrum dominance and all these neocon fantasies. And we've hollowed out the middle class, we've hollowed out our infrastructure, we've neglected our health. All of these things are inevitable when we don't attend to what is actually important, the human being. And that's what we're here to turn around. It's really a shift of our energy and attention, and everything else will follow from that.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Charles. This is very, very, very pointed right now. Particularly, this may be the last stand for lesser evilism, because this is, you got to vote for the lesser evil, and that's becoming a more stale response these days. as the burgeoning problems emerge. Where this is not 2016, it's not 2020. There's a new kid in town, and there's a calling. I think what you're presenting here is a calling to the American people. Anybody home? Hello, hello. Anybody out there? This is the absolute time to make that shift and take that agency that's required. That's the other part of democracy. You said it earlier, that it's not something that is we're waiting for it to be handed down from on high, or as you said yesterday in the Earth Day presentation, that we've learned in this so-called civilization to look for these technological fixes that are going to make it better. And what this whole thing that you're calling forth, which goes back to the very beginning, in the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. It's not the more beautiful world our mental structures know is possible. And the heart of the matter is the matter of the heart. And that's really what's being called forth, a center that is focused on the heart and not, as you said, some wishy-washy, muddly, let's pretend we don't disagree about things.
Yes. Yeah, it's just to put it another way, it's this readiness that I was speaking of, that this campaign is a barometer for. It's not, will he win? That's not the question. The question is, are we ready for him to win? Are we ready for the change that he represents? And that puts the question back at ourselves. Are you ready? I mean, that's the response. But can he win? Are you ready for him to win? If you are ready, then you're going to do something about it. And if enough of us are ready, he will win. He will win. Dare you believe that, or are you still a little bit comfortable with the way things are? Or are you still afraid to believe that things could be any different? And I understand if you are, because hope and change have been betrayed many times. I'm not saying Obama was insincere when he promised hope and change. I'm not saying Trump was insincere when he said he would drain the swamp. But not a lot changed. And the swamp, Trump filled his administration with swamp creatures. So I understand if people feel cynical. But underneath the cynicism, the cynicism is also a way to, it's self-protective, it's an expression of a wound of having been betrayed. And if you look deeply, you realize that hope exists too, and that this is not some trick of your soul, some delusion. And we see that, I often make an analogy to holistic health modalities. My wife is a healer, and in this world, we see people recovering from diseases that were medically incurable, that are considered, there's impossible cures that happen through ways that modern science does not understand. And I always say, if that can happen to a human body, it's also possible for the body of the nation, for the body politic, for the ecological body of this earth. Anytime that you witness a miracle, anytime that you witness something that your received knowledge base says was impossible, then you start to question, what else have I lost hope in that is actually possible? So I personally, I draw on that a lot because it kind of immunizes me against the despair narratives and the passivity narratives, the impossibility narratives that tell us that we are powerless, that tell us that our country never can change, that tell us that Bobby Kennedy can't win, that things are always going to be as they were, swirling down the toilet bowl.
There's so much more we could go on about, but I think this might be a good place to to try to end it with a call to action to inspire people to realize that their contributions. You asked the question: are we ready to elect Bobby Kennedy? And are we ready to change? Are we tired of this? And are we ready to take the action necessary to change? And are we willing to do what it takes, which can be as simple as the political courage to vote for what you want versus voting for what you don't want? Are you really ready to change so that we can begin the healing, so we can turn this corner together? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. People can go to the website, they can put yard signs up, they can donate to the campaign. All of these things at this moment are expressions of democracy. And
did you ever think you would be involved in a political campaign?
Not really,
years.
I mean, oh, and by the way, I do have I need to end at one. Do have a somewhat hard stop, but
No,
I'll say no. Although I used to have like these weird fantasies of giving political speeches, as if I were a candidate. But those were tempered by my knowledge that I would be a horrible politician, terrible president. I can't manage a team of 4 people very well, not to mention like an enormous bureaucracy. Like I just don't have a lot of the political skills. I'm bad with names and faces, I get there's like a million reasons why I would be a terrible politician and why I would hate to do that. But now, like all of a sudden I've become a speechwriter and doing a lot of the part I like.
Yeah.
And even now giving some speeches too, as kind of a surrogate or as an ally. But no, I never seriously thought that something like this would happen.
Yeah.
I've been like a countercultural philosopher. I've been like so many steps removed from, the mainstream political world. It was really quite unexpected that this would happen.
Yeah. My wife gives me grief because she goes, "You're just nothing but a billboard for Kennedy." She goes, because I won't leave the house anymore. And I've got 4 signs out in front of the house that she keeps, and I have never gotten involved, even though I've been involved in politics and thought of politics all along, but never have I ever gotten behind a candidate in the way I feel towards this candidate and what it represents and the change it can make. And it's like, I'm committed to do whatever it takes, along with hundreds and hundreds of others that are committed to do whatever it takes to help get this man on the ballot first step, then get him elected, and then continue the process of the change with helping Forward Party and others. But I wore this, I wear something with Kennedy's name on it. Almost every thing that I wear when I walk out the door has something with Kennedy on it. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kennedy socks, even. I hear those are on color.
Oh, I have these new sweats with it on the front leg that are these skin tight like young people wear. And my wife goes, "Those are for young people." I said, "Well."
One more thing. This goes back to the book that I read, during the Kennedy administration in the early 60s, called Profiles in Courage. And that was the book that Jack Kennedy wrote prior to being elected. And that is one of the most absent characteristics and qualities. And what I see in Bobby Kennedy is that quality of courage. When I watched his bio movie, remembering that he actually overcame addiction, that he was addicted for many years, and he was enslaved to it, and he overcame that. And that is a mark of character. It's a way of stepping beyond a predetermined limit or destiny. And very few people in politics have had that kind of having to work through something that deep, which of course went back to the death of his father, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that
Yeah.
we're ready, going back to the theme that you brought up very early on, Charles, is that we're ready to pick up that healing theme. Only this time, it's the American people who are creating this wave that only the people can create if it's going to be successful. So thank you for being we don't want to call it spearhead. We don't want spears. You're a spearhead. You're spearheading this campaign as well, so that we can say you're presenting it in such a way that more and more people will have to take notice. So thanks so much, Charles, for what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, his addiction history is one reason why I trust him, actually, because someone who has been through that knows that he is no better than any other man. You cannot think that you're better than somebody else when you've been there. I don't know if he's the only politician who has such a history. I think that there are some who have been alcoholics and stuff, but it is a very humbling experience to have gone through. And I think that it's, very much part of the reason why he is so accessible to people, so caring of others, and compassionate. Because, you look at, if you've been through that, like, that if not for an accident of fate, that guy in the gutter could be me. And in some sense was me, And if I can make it through that, so can you. So it's not just pity. It's also an embodied knowledge of the capacity of the human being to heal.
Wow. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it, Charles.
Yeah.
I
Charles,
so much appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for hosting, guys. Really enjoyed it.
I can't thank you enough. We will put a lot of information in the show notes with links to different things. I hope people will go there and check out Charles and some of his writings and follow. But most importantly, we've got to get Bobby on the ballot everywhere and get him elected so that we can make this change. So again, Charles, thank you. And if you're watching on YouTube or listening on our audio podcast, please subscribe, please like, and of course, please share with your friends and followers. So thank you again so much for being here.
Thanks.
From political battlefields to cooperative playing fields, it's a long journey to the more beautiful and just world our hearts know is possible. Let's go there together. Thank you.